Well, Andrey, thank you for joining us for this chat. It's my pleasure to welcome the third of our three contributors to our new volume, Major Power, Rivalry, and Nuclear Risk Reduction. Dr. Andrey Baklitskiy is a consultant to the PIR Center in Moscow and a member of the research staff of the Center for Global Problems and International Organizations in the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Andrey, thanks so much for joining us today. Could you give us
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Could you give us a little bit of information about your background and about the PIR Center?
So my background is political science. I'm graduated from the Urals Federal University with a diploma in international relations. And I've been working on nuclear issues for a decade now at PIR Center, which is a private think tank in Moscow, which does global security. And also, as you said, at the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Foreign Ministry, where we do some research for the foreign ministry. I used to mainly work on non-proliferation, like Iran issue, but then maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, I was slowly moving towards arms control because arms control was falling apart, and this was something I thought would be much more important to work on.
Thank you. So is your interest primarily in arms control, or is it more broadly nuclear risk reduction, or how should we understand your focus?
Right. So, I mean, you start with arms control, but then you figure out that you cannot do arms control without knowing the systems. Then when you learn the systems, you figure out you cannot do arms control without understanding why people even care about those systems and what issues arms control is trying to solve. So then you become interested in specializing nuclear weapons, and then also a little bit of conventional weapons in the places where it touched nuclear. So yeah, it's a long journey, and the rabbit hole is very deep. So probably broader than arms control now.
Good analogy, thank you. So you've contributed one of 3 essays to this volume. Would you summarize for our listeners the main messages of your essay?
Well, the first message I would like to send is that we should extend a new start, because it would be in the interest of both Russia and the United States. But then, apart from that, it's a bigger question if we still need nuclear arms control, and my impression is that we do still need it. And apart from New START treaty, which covers strategic offensive arms, there are a lot of other issues worth considering and worth maybe controlling, like space security, like missile defenses, maybe tactical nuclear weapons, and hypersonic arms race, now intermediate range systems with INF treaty guns. So we have a lot of things to talk about, and it would be really great to talk about them, and also to talk about them understanding that different sides have different position, different interests, and that's actually why we have arms control negotiations, is to come together and trade some things. And it's a long, laborious process. Negotiations are never easy. Sometimes they break down because parties want more than the other side is willing to give them. But without this process, we're pretty much doomed to not have any predictability or stability, which is bad for everybody. And the last point probably is that, again, arms control is an instrument. It's not a goal in itself. And we get the best of what we can get. So I still believe that legally binding treaties ratified by our respective parliaments are the best to conduct arms control, because at least they make the parties to negotiate inside themselves and to build broader domestic consensus. So once that's done, this is more like a secured issue. But if you cannot get legally binding treaties, it doesn't mean we should stop working. And there are other things we can do without legally binding treaties. We can do political treaties, we can do mutual understandings, and all sorts of things. Because in the end, the result is important, not the way in which you frame it.
Thank you. One thing that strikes me about all three of these essays is the tone of a hint, if not a tone, of cautious optimism that the authors have about the prospects for progress and some element of cooperation among the three. Do I have that right? Do you have a sense of cautious optimism? And if so, what's yours?
In this specific time, I'm probably more cautious than optimistic. But you're right. In the long run, I hope, I assume, would get somewhere, if only because, as I said, arms control generally works when it serves the interests of all the parties, and you enter into those agreements because you believe it is in your national interest. You have a problem, and then you try to solve this problem, including this arms control. We've seen before then trying to solve problems with imbalances of weapons by running arms races don't really work that well. So coming to some kind of agreed terms seems to be the most reasonable way. And it seems that in the long run, this is what actually happens. In that sense, I believe that it's plausible and it's possible that we'll have arms control in the future. We can have bilateral arms control. There are reasons to believe we might even have trilateral arms control. We might have even something with 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, 5 official nuclear weapon states. Again, it's not easy. It's probably not going to happen tomorrow, but yeah, laying the foundations, thinking about how it might be done till the point when parties are ready to seriously engage and seriously negotiate would be a good idea.
Thank you, Andrey, for this quick introduction to your contribution to the essays. Is there anything you would like to add in closing?
I would say that it's important to talk to each other and to understand each other, and that's why I believe those essays from 3 countries, from China, Russia, and the US, is important, because if you read them, if you look at them, you see that different countries, I mean, we are speaking now of personal capacity as an expert, not reflecting our official positions, but still things that the experts from those countries are interested in are slightly different, and they raise slightly different points, and some things are more important to one side than to another. So without understanding that, without taking that into consideration, it's really hard to see and to imagine we are moving forward. And as I put it, for example, in my essay, Russia is not very keen on transparency. It's not among the Russian demands. It's not about among what Russia would want and what Russia would push for at the negotiating table. If you're starting from the premise that transparency is something that all of us are seeking, then you would be very disappointed with Russian position and Chinese position. But then again, if you've been paying any attention to any of the negotiations we had since the 70s, that wouldn't be a surprise to you, because there is information asymmetry, there is a general approach to how you do those things. And yeah, if you know that, you may be slightly easier to go into those negotiations. And the same thing with risk reduction, which I also addressed briefly in my essay. In Russian view, there are legitimate risk reduction measures which aim at reducing risks in the places where something might happen accidentally, and you need hotlines for that. You maybe need some rules of the road there. But also, if you go too further on risk reduction road, you might encourage as a party by saying, okay, so those are the things you can do, and those are things you cannot do. Well, in some cases, you don't want the other party to do anything. So establishing the rules within which it's sort of permissible to do stuff might be counterproductive. So again, understanding those from the get-go and maybe taking them into consideration probably helps you with any negotiations.
Thank you, Andrey. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your contribution to the volume. Thank you for joining us for the workshop back in when we were still traveling and face-to-face things. It was good to welcome you to California.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
We look forward to future collaboration, hopefully with Xiaotong and Louis Dunn as well. So let me say this wraps up our discussions with the 3 contributors. I hope you, the listeners, are interested in this volume, and of course you'll find it at our website. Andrey, thanks for joining us today. I think at this point we stand adjourned.
Thanks for having me.